Hello, booktube. All right, we're back for part 2 of our, I almost said 9K Q&A, but it's not 9K anymore. We're well past 9K. We're on our way to 10,000 subscribers on this channel. At which point, I'm going to have to start acting like a cool, big booktuber. I'll have a merch store. I'll tell you to smash that like button and hit the bell for notifications. And I'll make all sorts of glitzy, totally insincere calls to action in every video. I'm going to have to work out how to do that. I'll have to work out a script because, of course, I'll be reading a script, too. I won't be just talking to you. But in the meantime, we're doing a Q&A, and we're on part 2, and we're up to Grace is Reading. Have you ever experienced vivid nightmares? Every once in a while, I do, yeah. If yes, do you have any preventative methods that worked for you? If no, can you think of any possible methods of prevention? I don't know of any preventative measures, but also you shouldn't take them, even if there were one. You shouldn't take it. They're extremely unpleasant. Nightmares, violent nightmares, are extremely unpleasant because your brain is working. It's bathing your cognitive centers in emotional responses, and you have no control over it. You are as vulnerable as a baby. You have no control over it whatsoever. Until you come out of it, you have to go through those emotions as if they were real because your brain is activating those centers of your brain. But it's not doing that idly. It's healthy for your brain to have that happen, even though it's extremely unpleasant. So I wouldn't take a preventative, even if there was one, because your brain wouldn't do it if it were purely unhealthy, unless we're talking trauma. If you're having the same recurring nightmare, well, then some sort of therapy might be necessary. But just an ordinary, out of the blue, vivid nightmare, everybody has those from time to time, and they are healthy, or they wouldn't happen. So I wouldn't take a preventative measure. And then let's see here. You have another question. This might be too big a subject for Q&A, but here goes. Apparently there aren't big subjects that are too big. Do you have any words of advice for those of us who aren't really excited to get going each day? Those of us who are a little too much like Oblomov and are just struggling moving on. Well, yeah, I do have a bit of advice. It's a thing that I repeat so often on this channel that's become a kind of comic refrain, which is to remember that in about 10 minutes you're going to be dead. And before you get to that point, you're going to be hooked up to 1 million tubes in a hospital, and you're going to regret the time you wasted. You're going to hate that. You're going to hate it. I got a wake-up call. To treasure every single moment, to be incredibly active, leap out of bed in the morning and dive into what you're going to do. And I realize that isn't true for everybody, but that constantly reminding yourself that in about 10 minutes you're going to be dead is a little bit morbid to go through life. I would suggest instead that a lot of the people I've met who, how did you put it? Aren't really excited to get going each day. It's been my experience that most of the people I've met who are like that don't have enough things lined up to get going for. And that can be fixed. Are you making something every day? Not just consuming things. Are you making something every day? Something, the making of which excites you. Actually makes you eager to get to it. So I've got 10 things that I need to do before I can get to the thing that I really want, the thing that brings me joy. I've got a bunch of stuff first. I've got work-related emails or, a Zoom chat or something like that. I got to get that done first, but then there's the goal. Do you have that? Or is it only that other stuff without any goal at the end of it? It's been my experience that a lot of the people who say that they find trouble just motivating to get up and get going don't have a lot of stuff to get up and get going for. And that should be fixed. That should be fixed anyway, because that's the stuff you're doing with the one and only life you're getting. So I would suggest that. Like, if you're lucky enough to love your job, then you likely won't have that problem, right? And if you have a job that you don't love, you still have time to do something that you do love. And if you're locating that and putting that on your daily agenda, then that will help you to just get up and get moving. I think about writing and reading myself. When I start a day, I am eager to get to that. I'm eager to do the day's writing and reading, and also, of course, talking to my imaginary booktube friends. I'm eager to do all of that, and I whatever it takes for you to feel that eagerness, that is the way to go through life. Not feeling it, or relegating that to the weekends, or even, God forbid, 2 weeks of vacation a year and just assuming that you're not going to feel that at any point until then. Oh my God, it's a living death. It's a living death. So I sympathize. Feel free, in this as in all other big and deep questions on a Q&A, feel free to email me if you want. Let's see here. Claire O'Connor has a barrage of questions. Number 1, do you like the Bee Gees? Okay, this is referred to in an earlier question. I'm reading these out of order. I do like the Bee Gees, yes. If yes, is there a favorite song, or do you love them all equally? Well, you can't love them all equally. Nothing beats Staying Alive. Nothing. Number 2, should I find Anthony Burgess's books intimidating? Not necessarily, no. On the Dick Cavett show, he comes across as a very smart guy and uses a lot of big words that I don't know. Well, that was partly shtick. He wanted to give that impression. But also it was partly the atmosphere. People put on their best intellectual A-game for Dick Cavett. So you watch old clips on YouTube of his show, you're going to get people who usually speak in guttural monosyllables talking really smart. Burgess was an incredibly, epically well-read person, and remembered a lot of what he read and could work it in without going to his reference shelf to get the right quote. But that doesn't have to be intimidating at all. That would only be intimidating if that was all he was bringing to the table. He's also a great writer, and he knows that and relishes that. He doesn't want to lose anybody. He doesn't want to lose any reader with the quoting and the alluding stuff. So he doesn't usually let that get in the way. I found that he does that worst in his writings about music, which thankfully nobody reads anymore. Anyway, number 3, should a first trip to America include Boston? Of course it should. Only Boston. We're the cradle of liberty, the hub of the universe. We are the only place worth visiting in this whole benighted country. Its history, like Burgess, actually seems a bit overwhelming. Well, there's a solution to that. You strap on your face mask, I'll strap on mine, and we will tour Boston together. You will learn a lot of its history, and you won't be intimidated for a moment. Darren S. says, what are your thoughts on Alan Eckhart's historical narrative series on the frontier? Worth tracking him down? Yes. Yes, I have. Do I have it here? Yes, I do. Oh my God, a prop in a Q&A. Now I am a real booktuber. I just found this thing just recently, just in 2021. I found Wilderness Empire with this beautiful cover, and reread it and loved it. Just loved it. Just a serious, no-holds-barred historical novel, and it's part of a huge series. I think it's number 2, and there are 12 or 13 that follow it. I've read that whole series once. I read them in when they had one particular brand of mass market paperback cover sequence, one artist that was commissioned to do all the covers. Haven't read them since. I was kind of hoping that this one meant that the others would show up at the battle, but they haven't yet. But they are worth tracking down. I've heard horror stories about how expensive they are. So, find a nice cheap paperback set and get those. But they are immersive. And I also strongly recommend his nonfiction. Dark and Bloody River is his nonfiction book about the Ohio River, and A Sorrow in Our Hearts is an enormous doorstop of his, a biography of Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. And they are great, and I want to recommend them because if you were to go to a used bookstore and find any of him, you'll find those in a different place in the used bookstore, but there's very little difference between his fiction and his nonfiction. He wrote his fiction full of historically verifiable characters saying things they're on record as saying. He cared about that quite a bit. So it's very much of a pattern and well worth reading. He is a really good author who has been forgotten. Did I lose you? Did I lose you? Yes, I did. Okay. All right, now we're on to the Steve Doctrine. Number 1. What do we do about followers of the doctrine who feel they're not quite bookish enough? Followers that may have recently read Death in Venice and had no idea what was going on, i.e. failed in grasping the subtle Platonic dialogue, Nietzschean Übermensch allusions that add up to give the real meaning of the story. Yes, this person is me. Nonsense. You have been paying too much attention to literary critics. You don't need to know any of that to enjoy the story in Death in Venice. And if you read Death in Venice and you think you're missing out because you don't know that stuff, then it's not the right time in your reading, not the right mood or atmosphere for you to read Death in Venice at all. You don't need help for that book at all. If you're not resonating with it, then find something else to resonate with. You will come back to it. But you don't need literary critics, most of all. Good Lord. Platonic dialogue. And number 2, how does one not write like that pub sheet of the other day? Yes, the poor pub sheet that I beat up. That was terrible. Is there a book on writing tips or grammar basics that you would recommend as a writing companion? I wouldn't recommend anything as much as I would daily practice. Lots of it. Keep a journal every day and also write other stuff every day. Daily practice is better than any kind of manual. I, for one, am nervous just writing these questions. Well, let's take a look at your question, shall we, to see what we can do with this. How does one not write like that pub sheet the other day? What is wrong with that sentence? Number 1, why use the one? You're talking about yourself. That's the question that you're asking. Everybody knows that already. I know that already. Your intended audience, in other words, knows that already. So how do I? And then why write what you don't want to do instead of what you do want to do? Why write not write instead of avoid writing? Right? Why not use an active verb instead of a negation of an active verb? To make it plainer. To make it just plainer. So how do I avoid writing like that pub sheet the other day? Doesn't that read better than how does one not write like that pub sheet the other day? That's a simple fix, and it does read better. Let's go on to the next line. Is there a book on writing tips or grammar basics that you would recommend as a writing companion? That line is pretty good. And then we have the final line. I, for one, am nervous just writing these questions. Well, you're not in a drafting committee. You are the one writing this question. So you don't have to write for one, right? I'm nervous just writing these questions. We'll be fine. See, there you go. Clean up your prose in no time at all. Dostoevsky did smile. Says, when reading, do you picture the events that are taking place? Say Tatiana is speaking with Onegin. Would you imagine the scene with your own faces? Maybe even adding yourself into the story as a dashing Onegin? I hope this question makes sense. It does. I don't usually do that, but I usually go by the descriptions that the author gives me, which helps a lot when I'm assessing what kind of a job they do in that regard, because if I've got blank spaces, then I know they didn't do that job. But I typically don't. I certainly don't insert myself into stories now because they're made up. They don't exist when you close the book. But I don't typically picture things beyond what the author is making me picture, because that's part of the author's job, and it's part of my job to assess that. So I typically don't know. Scrubbed, that's 3 T's at the end, says, are there any good movie novelizations that you would recommend? I've recommended the novelization to Jaws 2 many times. It is really good. Also, what are your thoughts on A Book of Memories by Peter Naidas? I liked it a lot when I read it. I would love to find it again. It'd be perfect for March of the Mammoths, wouldn't it? It's a huge thing. It's like 1,500 pages long. I loved it when I read it. So I'll have, the Brattle will provide. I'm sure that I will come across a copy, but I'd love to read it again. But I remember really liking it, thinking that it really respected my intelligence. Catherine Lockhart says, I thought of 2 more. Oh, my dear. Did we have you already? How do you find new booktube channels? And what about a channel will make you subscribe? I typically go at this a different way. Just because when you're a brand new booktuber, getting subscribers, as has come up in a now infamous discussion from Barb at the Font and Kit's World did a discussion about how nervous, the strain of being a new booktuber. And they talk about subscriber counts during those very early days when the count is very small and everyone means something. I've taken those conversations to heart over the years. So what I tend to do, whether it's the BookTube newbie tag or whether just the algorithm feeding me some channel I've never seen before, but the BookTube newbie tag is good because it will feed me channels that the algorithm will ignore because they're so small. What I typically do now is just subscribe blindly. So if I hit a channel, I will subscribe and like, and then just wait. And what I do is I wait to see if they're ever going to post another video, or if I watch 2 or 3 videos in a row and they're not good, they're just boring, or they speak to, they're very entertaining and they speak to books, but not anywhere in a world that I would even care about. That's a lot rarer. In which case I will quietly unsubscribe. But what I typically do now is just subscribe and like right across the board in the hopes of netting all sorts of good channels, which means that my view queue is enormous. It's a lucky thing that I watch nothing else. Let's see here. TRP says, your thoughts on UK comedian Ricky Gervais? I like him. A little bit obvious, but I like him. Also, have you delved into the world of his good friend Carl Pilkington? I don't think so. The Abiding Badger says, hey there, would you say watching SpongeBob is greater use of one's time than reading philosophy? Well, yes, but watching SpongeBob is a better use of one's time than a lot of things, since it is brilliant. Royale Tube says, are there books that you go to when you are experiencing loss or grief? Typically not when it's hot. When the loss or grief is hot, when you're in the storm of it and you can't get out and everything you look at or think about or breathe is that loss, right then, books don't help. Right after that, when that storm starts to abate and it's still really bad, your skin is just raw all over and the world seems wrong. It seems unfair to keep going on enjoying it. During a circumstance like that, once the worst of the storm has started to abate, then yes, I will go to, the Stories of Eudora Welty or the Diary of Samuel Pepys. Everybody will have a different go-to books there. And they are designed to just make me remember warmth, to make me remember laughter and involvement and happiness. You have to remember those things because you need to be reminded. Once the first part of that storm subsides, when the storm is at its worst, nothing will help. It's just agony. Once it starts to subside, you have to start reminding yourself that you're still here, and that's not wrong. That's not a betrayal of the one you've lost. That's not wrong at all. You have to start latching back on to the real world. You know what I mean? And those kinds of go-to books work for me. Everybody will have a different kind. But I think it's unfair to expect of a book that it will reach into the firestorm when it's at its worst. The key here to remember, if I can go on this way on subjects that don't have anything about books, the key to remember is the firestorm at its worst, when nothing can reach you and you can't reach anything, when nothing helps and everything is agony. That is perfectly natural. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That is not excessive. But you have to keep an eye on how long that lasts. Because if it lasts too long, if it goes on for an inordinate amount of time without ever abating, without you being able to reach outside that storm, then something has gone wrong with your grieving. The storm is not wrong. And its gradual abatement is not wrong. But if it doesn't abate, then something has gone wrong and you need to address that. And I know it's a trite and tired thing to say here, but the number one person who would want you to address that is the one that's causing this pain. The one who's lost caused this pain. Just think about it that way. But once the initial just white hot storm has receded, I always just go to comfort books until I'm ready to grapple with the world again. 000 says, have you read, flip off, I said it, you're not supposed to ask that, the novel Supermarket by Bobby Hall, a.k.a. Logic. He's a rapper / singer-songwriter. I have not. Jonathan Noel says, your thoughts on the films of Quentin Tarantino. They are largely junk. But they have a couple of scenes that are tremendously good. That's all he's really good for, his scenes. He should be a scene doctor. There's a job, an informal job like that in Hollywood. He'd be great at it. Instead, he's been given whole movies to direct. But there are a couple of scenes in his movie. Almost guaranteed in any Tarantino movie, there will be at least one or two scenes that are sheer brilliance. I refer, of course, to the long 2-part fight scene of The Bride in Kill Bill. But there are others, too. Let's see here. Chad says, sup brah. What's the hardest thing about being a Chad such as we are? This refers to the last Q&A in which one of you asked, might have been Chad himself, asked what it's like for me to be such a Chad. For those of you who aren't in the know, it is a terminology in the incel community for the stereotypical Ken doll icon of masculinity that they view, that the incels view as stealing the women who would otherwise be their rightful property. And the hardest thing about being a Chad is trying to validate all of those chinless incel wonders. They deserve a certain amount of validation. They are technically human, but it's tough. It's tough to give it to them. I will do a whole video on the incel world at some point or other. I blame Courtney Pickles. She's the one who introduced me to the whole concept. And then I went down a rabbit hole, perhaps the saddest and most noxious rabbit hole on all of the internet. Now I know everything about incels that there is to know. And I'm not 100% sure that they should have any kind of civil rights. I'm not sure that they should vote or anything like that. But they are still technically human. And the hardest thing about being a Chad is granting them that. It's tough, but I try. I've made the mistake of getting into comments exchanges with some of these people. And oh my. Oh my. Oh my. I know that I look old. I am, in fact, old. But I have been in many, many, many instances of unarmed combat. And I have never doubted myself in any of those instances. And believe you me, those of you who don't have any idea what Chad or I are talking about, that makes me a Chad, no matter how old I am. I would still be an object of incel ire. Anyway, Thrift Bookish says, number 1, have you watched the teaser trailer for the Foundation trilogy series that Apple is producing? I have, yes. If so, what did you think, and will it be better than the new Dune movie? I'm not 100% convinced that the new Dune movie is going to be any good. It's too early to tell, but early signs give me a lot of dismay. Dune is an ensemble story. Yes, it is about a messiah, but there are all sorts of major characters involved. And the main star of this Villeneuve Dune does not want to be part of an ensemble. He is, in his own mind, a superstar. He wants it to be his show. And has had his people make that perfectly clear. To the limited extent that he can be told no, we'll see. But that gives me pause anyway. And also the director. The director has engaged in a whole bunch of pandering virtue signaling. And that is a death knell to any movie. No movie can be made that way. That means that you are not the director. Instead, you are the chief appeaser of a blue checkmark mob on Twitter. And that is disastrous. You can't make a movie that way. And he's already done the damage by gender swapping. You don't mess with Dune. You don't mess with the text. The text works just fine. And he gender swapped a major character. Liet Kynes is a major character in the first part of the book. And he gender swaps him, and you can't do that. You can't do that for a number of different reasons, including a few that reflect very directly on the plot. And why did he do it? He's already made asinine comments to the press about how he thought that the female presence in Dune needed to be exaggerated a little, that he needed to do Frank Herbert a favor and throw a little bit more of a spotlight on a future society in which the Messiah is brought about by the machinations of his mother and a super society of women. Dune doesn't need any help from Denis Villeneuve or anybody else. Doesn't need any help at all. So I'm worried about the movie. I'm worried that La Chalamet is gonna have his face in every scene. We guarantee you that the movie cover, the mass market paperback movie cover of Dune will just be one huge Chalamet face. Rather look at a sandworm. But I have seen the teaser trailer for Foundation Trilogy, and I thought it was valiant. It's a valiant effort. I myself I don't say any more than any science fiction or fantasy work is unfilmable. But I do think that the Foundation Trilogy is unsalvageable. In order to make a movie of it, you are going to have to completely change it. I was watching a movie by the booktube channel Attention. He was talking about the Foundation Trilogy, and he was giving it props for all the things that it has done. He was talking about Asimov. He goes on at length about the Foundation Trilogy. He was giving it props for all the things that he does, and he just mentions rather awkwardly that it's tough to find a single female character. In the first book, I don't think there are any. And in the second two books in the original trilogy, they are perfunctory to say the least. And that's not what we want anymore in stories. And that's not what you get in Dune. So don't go saying that was a product of the time. Asimov didn't think that women were real. He was all in favor of their rights, but he didn't believe they were real. And it shows in his fiction. And so I'm wondering what they're going to have to do with Foundation in order to get around that. And there's a difference between that, tweaking it along those lines, and the kind of empty virtue signaling that I'm talking about. There's a difference between those two. That also is worth a long and ranty video. Don't get me started. A number of you have commented that I love to talk about TV series, cable shows, and movies, that I love to talk about them. I just restrained myself on this channel because this is all about books here. And then number 2, Netflix recently announced they're making a movie or series based on Brian Jacques' Redwall books. What did you think of the books? I never liked them the way their legion of fans did, mainly because you're going to be able to see it coming a mile away. Because for me, talking animals is not theoretical. I was raised and socialized by a species that wasn't human. I learned how to communicate with them before I learned how to communicate with members of my own species. I know how strange it is. I know how utterly alien a world it is. And these books are full of animals acting like humans. So it always jarred on me in a way that it doesn't jar on so many people who love the series. I don't know how it's going to work, but we will see. That I'll have to wait and see if it's any good. I think Netflix and all these other streaming services, all these platforms with bucket loads of money, are just going to start going to epic science fiction and fantasy more often, more and more often. And thanks to Bridgerton, they'll also start going to romance more and more often. So it's a golden era for book lovers. We're going to see people take their best shot at dramatizing a lot of the stuff that we see. The success of The Expanse is going to guarantee that. That's fine by me. That's absolutely fine by me. I want to see it all, even the ones that fail. David Wardrop says, have you ever done research into family history? I assume the Donoghue name comes from Ireland. It does indeed. It comes from the west coast of Ireland. It comes from Donegal. I have not done much myself. Other members of my family, I have been told, have done quite a bit. Me Sainted Ma used to tell me that I had an aunt who was big into that and would do that sort of thing. But Me Sainted Ma was largely my only conduit of news about that, the whole extended family. And when she popped her clogs, that conduit closed. So I have no idea. I've never looked at that research, never seen anything like it. But I'm assuming that there's a long line of dirt poor and very opinionated Donoghues going back to the Battle of the Boyne. I'm assuming that's true. Jerome Jacobson says, number 1, did you enjoy reading the Mahabharata? I did, very much so, yes. A follow-up question to that is it necessary to read the unabridged version? I don't want to miss anything after all. Well, the only way not to miss something is to read the unabridged version. And once upon a time, I wish I had it, there was a beautiful, fully annotated 4-volume black trade paperback set. I wish I could remember who did that. Next time I see a copy at the Brattle, I'll grab it. That was completely unabridged and also had an amazing scholarly apparatus, introductions and notes, just to fairly well. But if you're not willing to embark on that, Narayan wrote a 1 volume of sort of a novelization, bookish type thing, and there are plenty of other things too. You will be missing something with any abridgment, obviously, but worth it to dig your way in. And if the abridgments give you a taste and you like it, well, then you know where to go for the whole thing. And number 2, for March of the Mammoths, can we do a read-along of an enormous work? I would like to do that, but read-alongs are giving me pause lately, because the last thing you want to do in a read-along is fail. The last thing I'd want to do is fail the rest of you. So I've sort of been leaning away from read-alongs, and I haven't thought about it for March of the Mammoths. Said Day asks, we got to ask, have you ever met Fran Lebowitz? No. Do you like her work? Yes, it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Obviously so. It has been forever. Okay, let's stop and come back. We'll come back in a minute for part number 3.